visual artist and a writer, and because most of my work is very enmeshed with my background working with Aboriginal people, particularly in that remote area, so it does require, often I go out there, spend chunks of time each year. Look, it's just a practice where whatever's the kind of most imminent deadline, whether it's, in mapping or writing or visual art, that's what I'm doing. There's usually a trip involved where we travel and the bulk of the material is done because you're going to the locations. So it starts out a piece of very good, robust artist canvas, gets primed, and then I usually put in a topographical sort of layer. And then we use acrylic paint, so they're fairly, as long as they're not actively sort of slashed and burned, they're pretty indestructible, and they get rolled up. And I've actually got pieces of polypipe that they fit into, and then they get carried around on the roof of my Hilux. And the next site, you pull them out, you roll them out. I'm very, very, I've got very, very sort of good at that part of it. But as soon as they're laid out, people gather around, and because everyone, in a sense, can read them, you get a cross-cultural conversation where people are actually coming from a similar place. Instead of, I used to observe scientists coming out, talking to people, both sides would have the best will in the world and, nod and smile, but basically often no one had a clue what the other person was talking about. And so the maps for me became initially, how do you get people, talking about the same thing? And so from there, then it just has its own momentum. We always record the stories. Often it's videoed, photographed, etc. So the map itself is essentially just, it's the ground around which all this other material is collected. So they themselves are, I always see them as these kind of active documents that you unroll them and all this noise kind of emanates. Look, I'd say the same as I did in the panel. I think that this is a template that can be adapted and adjusted wherever you are, and that any project, I think, to know what is already embedded in that landscape, culturally, historically, all of those are just as significant as the topographic sort of ground. Finding out initially who's there, who to talk to, just start the conversation, and in a sense without preempting anything. Don't go looking for something in particular, but just go open to what is going to emerge from that place. It is often very layered. It's not just that, Indigenous presence, and of course you do have to take into account the physical attributes if you're going to put something. But there may be, sort of other overlays. There may be, there might have been early farmers, or there might have been a bunch of hippies that camped up, if you're on the coast somewhere. All of that history is, contributing something to that place, Look, I think I was very struck with the other two, the two Indigenous panel members. The focus was very much on, sites where bad stuff's happened, be it the prison or the massacres or whatever. And that I think, we're entering a time where one way or another those conversations need to be had. I mean, I touched on it very briefly with the Sturt Creek story, which is in itself a whole expanded story, which you would know from my book. So finding ways to persuade people to listen where they don't just switch off and walk away. I think that's our big challenge. And as a white Australian, in some ways that's what I try and do with my work, is draw people, in a sense, persuade them that you're a reliable narrator in a sense, and bring them to a point they wouldn't necessarily go to of their own accord. So I think that's probably the job of, in our different ways, is creating a safe space to have that conversation, I think.